Welcome to the Fresh Vending podcast, where we discuss how smart vending machines are revolutionizing fresh food accessibility for both creators and consumers.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is episode 4. I'm Isaac.
I'm Nathan.
And today we wanted to talk about how the pandemic has changed the food service industry. This is a really interesting topic. There are many temporary changes that happened during the pandemic, obviously, with shelter in place and with supply chain going crazy. But we kind of want to focus on the stuff that is here to stay, like the changes that are here to stay. And we have a few that we'd like to talk about.
Yeah, I think one of the most obvious ones to everybody out there is definitely when we talk about labor. And I think a lot of, there's still some speculation around exactly what happened, but so many places we go, I mean, that is just the buzzword. And, I would have thought, or somebody would have thought that it would have gone away by now, but clearly, here we are a couple years later and then some, and it hasn't. And it's interesting. I've heard a lot of reasons about, workers maybe not wanting to go back into environments that are high stress, perhaps underpaid, not great benefits. But it really makes me scratch my head sometimes, and I wonder where did they go, or how are they kind of sustaining themselves? But as much as you want to answer those questions, the food service industry must go on, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, what are some of the things that you've kind of seen of ways that food service operators are working around that?
Well, definitely increasing the benefits and the wages, but like you said, that doesn't always help, and that hasn't always helped. And so a lot of things with automation, of course, just any way to decrease overhead and staff. Maybe that's only doing delivery or heading into other technologies that we'll talk about later, like smart vending or even ghost kitchens, just things that'll decrease their full-time staff as much as possible. I'm kind of curious though, Nathan, because my paradigm of labor before the pandemic is quite narrow. I started a food business in college in 2018, and I remember my sister worked for me, my other sister worked for me, and I had a couple of friends that worked for me, and so I never really had to hire for labor for a food business. And the only outside labor, quote unquote, that I got is one time we were at the farmer's market and a little kid walked up with his parents. He's like, "Can I work for you?" And I was like, sure. And so he spent a day taking down the orders and writing stuff down and taking cash and stuff like that. But so anyways, I've never had to hire for labor. So what was it like before the pandemic? Because you've had a few food businesses.
Sure. And I think that in my experience, so I've, been partner owner in a couple different cafe chains here in the Bay Area, but I've also worked for in large institutional environments, like when I was executive chef at UC Berkeley. And it's very different, right? So when you're working in one of these large, well-established institutional type environments, most of the time you're going to attract people that like the benefits, the hours are much more consistent, the environments tend to be much more kind of stable in general.
Yeah.
And I'm comparing that to, your typical smaller restaurant location or small restaurant chain. So that's that kind of environment, and usually there's less wiggle room too. It's maybe not it's the food is kind of geared towards making 90% of people happy, whereas when you go into a lot of restaurants, they tend to be more kind of specialized in what they do, so you attract different types of workers in those environments. Whereas when you get into a restaurant, quite often there tends to be more fluidity in things. Perhaps there's a little bit more freedom on what you can do menu-wise and things of that nature. Also, restaurants, a lot of times you're getting out of work at, midnight or maybe even 1 a.m. depending on where you're working. I know for myself, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, the restaurant lifestyle was very exciting and fun. And that as I got older and started to have children, things that were more in line with institutional dining in my mid and late 20s made more sense until I fully stepped out of being hands in food and got into food tech.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I feel like in general terms, we talk about morning larks and night owls. And I think, I'd like to see if those people actually, in the food service side of things, they actually go into bakeries where it's early mornings and then close at 2 versus like our full service restaurant that maybe opens at 11 and closes at 10 p.m. or something. It's kind of interesting.
For sure. And I think that some of the stuff that I started to see at least was restaurants took a hard look at their hours. They took a very hard look at the front of the house staff, because it's like you can only, there's some things you just can't cut, right? Like a salad's not going to make itself.
Yeah.
Right. So when you look at that, I mean, you could say, okay, well, maybe we'll get some ingredients that come in where they're, pre-cut, or the meat's more fabricated when it comes in, so it's less labor, but you still fundamentally you have to have somebody there to assemble it. Whereas I think a lot of operations we're looking at, like, how much do we need that service person? We want that warmth and we want that customer connectivity, but the bottom line is that, like, if nobody's going to show up to be your cashier, you have to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of scary, but I think the silver lining to that is that everybody was dealing with that at the same time. So if you're moving towards, all right, we're going to have self-order kiosks, or we're going to have a QR code that's, that you have to scan when you sit down to get your own menu, and it's happening, at restaurants and in these environments in general, it just makes it a little less daunting, and the consumers warm up to the concept. It's not as risky because you just don't have a choice, right?
Yeah. No, it's crazy. I mean, speaking of self-order kiosks, I went to a boba place yesterday with my family, and literally, and it was a self-order kiosk, and literally like 6 months ago, I went to the same place. It was a person. So it's like, I mean, that's one way that restaurants are cutting, or food places are cutting labor costs. Another one, I spent a few months in Hawaii just now, and to me, Hawaii is just like the most down-to-earth, aloha spirit, human interaction kind of place that you can possibly get. And their Taco Bell there on the North Shore, granted it was a Taco Bell, but also had self-order kiosks that I had not seen like last year when I was there, right? So there's just a lot of shift going into that automation.
It's interesting. You just reminded me. I was in Florida a couple weeks ago with my family. We took my son to Disney for his 6th birthday, and I went into a restaurant. It was like a diner type place, and they had a QR code, so you scan it with your phone and you go through the menu. And at this place, you could actually place your order. It wasn't just access to the menu. You could actually follow through and say, I want this, that. And in some senses, it was really nice because it was just like instantaneous. Our order's in, it's done. And it's not the kind of place where you're going to say, where you have all these, make my customizations of how you want your steak and things like that. So that part was really nice. But what I appreciated is they completely eliminated the server, but the person that brought us our waters was like, you could tell that they had been trained to like put a little bit of customer service and warmth on that delivery. Yeah. Because normally it's like, here's your waters, your server will be right with you. I said, hey, thanks for coming in today. And, did you have any problems with the app? Great. And we went through that experience. And then again, when they dropped off our food, that same food runner, it was like what I would call like there was like a hospitality runner, just versus a food runner. So I thought that was a really interesting adaptation where they eliminated the entire server role out of the equation because they probably had to replace some technology, but then again, thoughtfully layered in like the human element. So that was something that really stuck with me, and I think it was a really savvy way to go about evolving their system.
Yeah, I truly think that the food technology or the apps or any sort of software that is gonna blossom in food will be made not to replace humans, but to accentuate the human aspect, because food is always going to be kind of that human touch side of things.
Yes, and I think there's a discipline that goes with it too, to like take a step back and say, the tech's slick and efficient and way more cost effective, but how and where are the opportunities to like layer in the human element and observe customers and ask customers and say, how in clever ways, like how are they connecting with our brand, right? Yeah. Like what is the affinity, the loyalty, like are we stirring up those emotions in this process? Because you can definitely go off the deep end and go way too far tech, and even though your food may be amazing, you really need to have that next level connectivity and make sure that you don't compromise that with being super progressive with adopting all these technologies.
Yeah. I mean, last story for me about this labor thing. I guess we've bled into other topics that we want to talk about, but you talked about Disneyland, and I was at Disneyland a few weeks ago, I guess, and we were on the Star Wars ride, and my friend who works for Disney, Lucasfilms, she was like, "Do you guys want corn dogs?" I'm like, "No, I'm good," or whatever. And then a couple of friends said yes, and so she ordered it on the app, the park app, and then we got off the ride, we walked to the closest stand, and then she just came, like, walked up to the stand, grabbed the corn dogs, turned around, and it's just like that. She already paid, and they just had the corn dogs waiting for us at that stand. And I was like, holy cow, like, that is so slick, so easy. And you talked about how do these technologies help consumers connect with the brand. If that's it, like, spend as much time on the ride as possible and as little time waiting in line, waiting for your food to get packed up.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of, and again, I think that's a good example because that's food, but it's also, to me, there's a total overlap in like the hospitality industry and how food plays into that and vice versa. And I think that in addition to the overlap, there's a lot that you could learn, from other other facets of the hospitality industry. But I had the similar experience at Hershey Park in Pennsylvania a couple months ago, where it was like you could see the timelines on every single ride and see, this one's has a 10-minute line in real time. That one has an hour-long line, and it's really great to be able to like empower people with information about their hospitality experience. So it really puts them in the driver's seat. And I think that's a different type of way to emotionally connect with your consumer, is to say, maybe there's not as much of the human element, but what we are doing is we're empowering you with unique information that you wouldn't have otherwise. Perhaps it's, access to unique deals that you wouldn't have otherwise, those types of things. So I think that's another great example of how you can kind of change the paradigm and make it something that's exciting and interesting.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about labor, and just to add a couple things, when I've researched why the labor industry has been the slowest to recover from the pandemic, I actually found an article that talks about where these people are going. I mean, I think it was by The Atlantic or one of these news outlets, but it's the story of 5 people that were in food before the pandemic that are now doing something else. And I don't know if you've seen this article or read it, but
no, I haven't.
I can link to it in the show notes anyways. And one of them became a gardener, and anyways, it's a very interesting article, so I can link to that. But yeah, I would say labor is one of those main things that it's one of the things that has changed, I mean, for good, honestly, since the pandemic. And we've talked a little bit about how food companies have adapted. Digitization is one of them. We pretty much bled into that already.
Right, and I don't think that's going to go backwards. So if by some crazy stroke, all of a sudden people said, en masse, I'm ready to go back and work in kitchens where I was before. That's here to stay. The digitization piece, right? Like it's here. It makes sense especially for a lot of types of business models. It makes sense for some, maybe not. If you give me a QR code at a Michelin star restaurant, I'm never going to go back. But I think for, mainstream, a lot of these things have solidified themselves, and it's just not going to go back to where it was, and it's here to stay.
Yeah. And I don't know, digitization, like the point of sale and the kiosks are one thing. I guess that's also a part of food tech, but marketing and, these food operators that were not on social media before, who definitely got pushed into the online digital marketing social media place, they're also not going to stop those operations, because I feel like even before the pandemic, people were already searching online and ordering online and looking at Instagram profiles of these food places, and now it's more than ever you need to have some sort of online presence to survive here.
Absolutely, and it's interesting how it's gone even to the next level with ghost kitchens, right? Like, so they existed before, before the pandemic. I was actually running a location that was like an incubator ghost kitchen in San Francisco back in like 2011. And so these things have been around, but it had the adoption. Like back then, it was like these little pop-up trendy places that were doing those types of things. And then during the pandemic, all of a sudden you had these massive brands that were saying, we're going to roll out ghost kitchens nationally. And for those of you that aren't familiar with ghost kitchens, essentially it's a commercial kitchen that can be just about anywhere, and a brand can open up there, and it's not a place where you can go and sit down. Usually it's delivery only, but the idea being that if you had 4 or 5 brands in this same ghost kitchen, because they don't have a dining room and they don't have, most of the time they don't even have a sign out front letting you know what's going on in that kitchen, is that you could take the 6 or 7 most popular dishes for each one of those restaurant concepts, put it into one footprint that's delivery only, and you cut out a lot of the overhead of the dining room and the wait staff and all those types of aspects. And you're also able to, in a very inexpensive way, reach a whole new audience that lives within, delivery distance of that location. So this is something that, every major food brand in America, or when I say food brand, I mean restaurant brand that's a franchise, is either doing this or is at least taking a hard look at operating a ghost kitchen.
Yeah. I also read something that those who are sharing a ghost kitchen also have a wider potential for their menus. It's like if you're running your brand and I'm running my brand, I'm like, hey, can I take your brownies and put walnuts in them and then sell them under me? And you're like, okay, that's fine. I'm already making them anyway, same equipment anyway, so it's not a huge extra cost for me to start making some of similar food as you are and then selling it under my brand.
Yeah, I think they'll have brand designers that will come in and say, okay, our ghost kitchen model, and there's companies that specialize in this, where they'll say, we operate ghost kitchens nationally, and in this ghost kitchen you will have a deep fryer, you will have a broiler, and you will have a standard convection oven, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So the entire menu is designed around cross-utilization of equipment, to your point, cross-utilization of ingredients, as well as employees. So when you start to do that, you can do some really interesting special things that are amazing for the brands to be able to open. But we've also seen some examples of, there's been some celebrity endorsed brands where Mr. Beast was the one that kind of got everybody excited about it. He's entertaining, regardless of your feelings of him and what he's doing. It's kind of entertaining with his massive giveaways. But then a bunch of other celebrities jumped on the bandwagon, and just because you slap a celebrity name on it, being a restaurateur is still complicated, and a bunch of them kind of quickly went down in flames.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting Wild West type concept, but you have these other companies that specialize in opening the infrastructure of ghost kitchens. I think one of them is actually called Ghost Kitchens. There's another one called Kitchen United. Just last week, they announced they have $100 million in funding. I was talking to one of the founders recently. So it's interesting that, that is another trend that is clearly here to stay, for better or for worse, as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah, and related to that is delivery. I mean, for food operators or restaurants that aren't in a ghost kitchen or aren't using ghost kitchens, they're definitely increasing the delivery frequencies as well since the pandemic, and that's not going to go away. I mean, I read things all the time that are like, they ask people, how likely are you to eat in a restaurant again? And this was maybe a year ago after the pandemic, and most of them say probably not, or how likely are you to participate in some sort of off-premises dining, like dining from home or taking out or whatever. A lot of them say, yeah, I like eating from the comfort of my own home, so
I don't know about you, but I've had amazing experiences with that, and I've had the vast majority is kind of mediocre. You get the food maybe 45 minutes after it was made, and you're paying an extra $5 for delivery, and it's kind of, here you go, dropped off, and there's tons of packaging and all that kind of stuff. Those things with me personally, even if it's a restaurant that I like, it just doesn't fit me well from a quality standpoint, from the earth, kind of the impact, the carbon footprint of also delivering one meal at a time. But I've also had some really awesome experiences. Like I ordered some food from this local company here in the Bay Area called Food Gnome, and it was they've started to allow people to cook out of their home. So this Korean mother-daughter, I think it's called Sisters, but they prepare it, and it was just packaged so beautifully, and you could tell there was so much intention when I actually went and picked up my food from, I mean, they're local, you can see who's local to you. And I went and I picked up this little package of Korean food, and it had some there's a dish that they make. It kind of looks like giant sushi. It's a Korean dish, and I got some kimchi and some different things. But it was an amazing experience because I could tell the level of attention to detail with like the labels and everything that they had in there. Where that was really awesome, and I really enjoyed that. So it was kind of interesting, the different ends of the spectrum from quick, fast pickup food that was local to kind of the run-of-the-mill food delivery services.
Were they on a I mean, 'cause you told me about Chef before, which is just an online platform for any kind of individual person cooking from their home. I have a buddy that started a similar thing in Utah called Entree. Have you used one of these before? And
I don't, to be honest, like I'm adventurous with technology, and I'm adventurous with food, but food delivery is kind of always, most all the time, been so mediocre with me that I'm not huge on that. But I love the idea of supporting a local startup, a local, food company. And when I say company, again, like this was some new legislation that passed in our county in the last year. And actually Food Gnome was at the forefront of that you could prepare food in your home, and it would have to be inspected by the Department of Health and all this kind of stuff. So I like supporting that, and I had a great experience with that, but I'm not, I would say I'm not adventurous, or I don't order food delivery that often because most of the time it's kind of mediocre for what you pay.
Yeah, and that is huge that legislation got passed, because a lot of the reservation that goes into starting a food business is actually getting into a commercial kitchen and actually, renting out a space. But the fact that these people can do it from their home.
And in retrospect, I'm sure that's one of the, because that concept that I just explained that's not unique. That's happening in New York, and it's happening in Chicago with different startup companies are doing these types of things. But that's also, I guess that's another vein of where these cooks and chefs could have gone to say, I'd rather cook at home and, sell my food the way that I want it to be. Like this experience that Korean mother-daughter team gave me was fantastic. And I've ordered from them again. So that, I think that's probably one more space that all of these people that were in hospitality that left, maybe a lot of them left and did go to, follow other, passions or interests that are more conducive to their lifestyle, but also probably some of them reinvented themselves within the industry.
Yeah. I certainly hope that just like technology, legislation will also continue to innovate around these different business models of food. I mean, we'll see, but it seems like things are heading in the right direction in terms of democratizing fresh food.
For sure. And it's really hard though for in fairness, for health departments to kind of keep up with. There's just so much going on with food technology. I mean, I think that food technology or food operations in general, in my opinion, somebody that's worked in the industry for 20 years, that it's changed more in the last 3 years than it has in the last 40 years.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and honestly, I don't know if you would agree, but some people's home kitchens sometimes are a little cleaner and more organized than commercial kitchens sometimes. So maybe
I've been in, I've been in the back of hundreds of restaurants, and even, probably at least 100 USDA facilities, and there's good facilities and there's bad facilities, and there's some that I was like, based on that, I will no longer be coming to dine at your facility. And there's others where you just say, wow, these people run a tight ship, and it's just impressive. So
well, in either case, I think off-premises dining has increased and will stay at a pretty high level. I mean, you can see it in drive-through lanes. Now there's like 3 or 4 lanes. And
that's such a good example. Yes. And you know, I brought up that point earlier. I'm glad that you said that, because I went to Chick-fil-A and In-N-Out. I don't eat fast food very often, but when I'm on the road, those are the 2 places I usually go. And we talked about this before, how they went to, you know, you're saying that they went to like all these big lanes, and they have these very elaborate drive-through systems now. Yeah. But the thing that I love that they did was what I was talking about earlier, is they layered in the human element in a really intelligent way. Did you experience that when you went there?
Well, In-N-Out's had it for years already, when there's a guy in front just like taking orders with his iPad, right? Or her iPad.
Right. And I think they really, but it's more than just taking the order, right? It's not this like transactional thing. It's more like, hey, how you doing today? What's this? Can I help you with anything? I mean, it feels like the quality of service that you would have from an interaction with like a waiter.
Yeah.
Which is just really nice. And then also it adds to the efficiency, right? Because they're taking your order like 6 or 7 cars back in the queue.
Yeah.
So that your food is being prepared much sooner. And there's a lot of thought and infrastructure that goes in with that. I mean, the amount of cars that they can fit at any one time into this queue is, you know, double or triple of a typical drive-through. And the one that I went to a couple of weeks ago, there was actually like 10 cars pouring out into the street, like kind of, you know, against the sidewalk. So tremendously popular, and just really impressive to see how that's concept that existed before the pandemic has kind of been put on, you know, steroids and evolved.
Fun fact: did you know that In-N-Out you can get grilled cheese sandwich, animal style?
Animal style is first, right? Because animal style, I think, is also something that's not on the menu. But no, I didn't know that you could get grilled cheese. But that's a fun concept in general, right? Do you want to share a little bit about, like, for those that don't know, like, there's secret menu items at In-N-Out that the people that are in the know always like to talk about?
Yeah, I have many friends that don't eat red meat, and so, but I like burgers, so I'm like, hey, let's go to In-N-Out, and they'll get a grilled cheese or something.
That's good to know. My 6-year-old does eat meat, but sometimes, you know, when some of his friends that hang out with us sometimes are a little bit more finicky. That's great. That's great intel. Yeah. I'll have to flex that and impress the 6-year-olds next time we go out.
Get a grilled cheese. Yeah, exactly.
Good stuff. So, I mean, yeah, but it's an exciting time in food and food technology from the pandemic, but it's just a lot, you know, to take in, right? I mean, we talked about the, you know, quintessential or fundamental changes that are happening with, you know, labor. There's the digitization. Cut this out. I'll start over. So we're talking about all the changes that are happening from, you know, labor, and that's kind of the cornerstone of food service, right? Yeah. And that interaction. There's the digitization of the consumer experience and how they get that order to the kitchen, ghost kitchens and delivery and food tech and drive-through lines. And that's just, I mean, those are some of the heavy hitters, but the list goes on and on.
Yeah. And we're excited to continue researching and covering those things on this podcast. And we're excited to be a part of it as well.
Absolutely. I think it's really important that, you know, these conversations are had and put out there, so that people, especially operators, can just stay aware of all the dynamics and some of the things that are going on in the industry.
Yeah, for sure. Is there anything else we wanted to talk about regarding how the pandemic has changed the food service industry?
I think that all in, when I look at all of these changes, is that what we've discussed is that operators have to be more open-minded. I mean, that's kind of, it forced, you always have people that are early adopters and always looking at, you know, new technologies and how can I change and have, you know, diversify my business model and these types of things. But I think the bottom line is that you couldn't sit back on your haunches and you couldn't be that person that says, you know, I make the best bowl of spaghetti in Chicago and I've been doing it this way for 50 years and I'm going to continue to do it this way for 50 years. You could keep that recipe the same, probably, and make it, unless you needed to make it more conducive to delivery. But the bottom line is that you need to be more open-minded to change. You were forced to. And those that were stubborn, a lot of them, unfortunately, it forced them to go out of business.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you were sharing a number with me before about the number of businesses that reported either, was it going on closures during the pandemic?
Yeah, NRA reported maybe like 100,000, over 100,000.
The numbers are just staggering.
Which is crazy to me.
Right. And that's really it. I think the underlying is you have to be ready to change and adapt. And a lot of times you can't rely on what's always worked. And if your ego is in the mix, that can make things even more complicated. And I think that was really the big takeaway for me that is, I think, is also going to drive the next 10 years of food service and technology. I think it's going to continue to be on that aggressive trajectory of change that we saw the last 2 years. It's not going to slow down. And those that continue to embrace it and don't have a mentality of the pandemic's over and people are coming back into my restaurant and now I want to fully revert my formula back to what it was. I think in some instances it may make sense to partially revert, but really being change-minded is really what is the bottom line of what's here to stay and what's going to make people successful.
Well said. Okay, I think we can wrap it up for this one.
Brilliant.
Thanks so much for listening. I'll link to some of those articles that we talked about in the podcast in the show notes, and we'll see you guys next time.
Happy eating.
Thank you for listening to the show this week. If you're interested in learning more about smart vending platforms, you can visit us at launchfoodspot.com. I'm Nathan Downs, and you've been listening to the Fresh Vending Podcast.